Hello Art Cadets and welcome to this week's video. Today we're going to do some sponge painting, and who better than to paint than Mr. SpongeBob himself. So if you're ready, let's go. So to start this painting I used a sponge to apply water to the dry paper, and then I added some watercolour paint using blues and greens because this is an sea picture again. The sponge I used is just a cheap sponge from any art shop or local supermarket. If you haven't got this sort of sponge, any sponge will do, even if it's a kitchen sponge or an old bath sponge, anything like that. So I applied colour until I was happy with the background colours that I wanted, and because the water's wet they all sort of blend into one another, which gives a really nice effect. And once I was happy with that, I went round the edges of my paper and just cleaned off the excess water to try and prevent any seeping underneath the tape. Now while the painting was still wet, I went in with a fine paintbrush and just did a sort of flowery shape. I didn't use too much paint. I was careful not to use too much because it does spread out, and you want some of that effect with the flowers on SpongeBob's painting. And it does bleed into the rest, so it gives a nice background effect when it's dry. For the last flower I used a fairly dry paintbrush, and that lifted off some of the paint, so it gave a different effect, and I thought this was quite good. Just mixes it up a bit and makes it a bit more interesting. And then I left this to dry before we did the next step. 2,000 years later. So for the next bit I then used a piece of kitchen sponge and put it into poster paint this time, so any sort of cheapy paint from an art shop or supermarket again, and I cut it into a sort of a square shape for SpongeBob's buddy, and then I also used some little circular sponge shapes for the jellyfish, adding in the legs with a fine paintbrush. So once it was dry, it was then time to add the whites of SpongeBob's eyes, and again I used this little circular sponge that I've got. If you haven't got these, then you can just use your fingers or anything else that's round. You can even use vegetable printing, so bits of potato that you can cut into shapes, and that makes a really good effect as well. And when that was dry, and making sure that SpongeBob's body was dry, I then added in the details with pencil. So SpongeBob's body was fairly straightforward. I just did a rectangle for the bottom half of his body, and then fairly simple shapes for his legs and shoes. For his arms I made sure they were about in the middle of his body, equal on either side, and just around where his mouth is. And he's holding a net, so I decided to do that around one of the jellyfish, make it look like he's actually catching the jellyfish. And once that was done, I then coloured them in. I chose to do colour pencil this time, just because it was easier, and for the fine details there's less chance of going out of the lines, and just thought it would be a nice effect. You can do paint if you want to and carry on with that, but I decided to do pencil. just went around the outside of SpongeBob with my dark green crayon just to give it a bit more of an effect there, so it stands out a bit more. And I used again my pencils just to fill in his eyes. I used my white gel pen to go around the outside of the jellyfish just to make them stand out, and at this point I realised that the jellyfish didn't look like it was in the net, so I went over the legs to try and make it look like it was actually catching the jellyfish. I also used the white gel pen to do the net and also his shirt and sleeves. If you haven't got a white gel pen, then you can use white paint. And again, just going around each of the jellyfish and doing a little bit of highlight on each just to make them stand out. I also used the white gel pen to do some little bubbles, just to make the picture more interesting and add some fun details. Looking at it now, I think his sponge body is a bit long, or his mouth should have been a bit bigger, but he's a sponge, so hey. Maybe he's just a bit wet today. I then went round with a black fine liner just around the bottom half of his body and his arms and legs. And also round his eyes. Not forgetting his eyelashes. To finish this picture off, I decided to do some grass underneath where SpongeBob is jumping, and again I just used my pencil crayons to do this, and just used a variety of different greens and some yellow as well, just to add some highlights. And the picture is nearly finished. And once it's finished, it's time to remove the tape, and this time we didn't get any problems with it tearing the paper.
Well, that's all for today, ArtCadets. I hope you've enjoyed drawing SpongeBob with sponges. Next week I thought we'd have a go at drawing something with pencil and giving it a splash of colour, so hopefully you can join us then. If you've enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next week.